Our next session is on mortality trends and turbulent times, and Louis Rousseau is back again to take us through this session. So over to you, Louis. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, morning, everybody. It's a bit of a difficult topic on an early morning on a conference morning, but luckily it's a short session. I want to talk to you about these mortality trends and turbulent times, really looking at sort of in my role, I work across Canada, UK, South Africa, and Australia, looking at research and analytics, of course. This is more looking at sort of mortality impacts and sort of research topics and things that we are keeping an eye on across that region that could sort of go beyond the data that we're looking at. So often when you're looking at data, you're pricing and you're pricing across a certain sort of data, historic data. What's different in the future? What could be different in the future that's not captured in your data is really what this talk is about. A little bit of dark clouds, but a little bit of silver linings as well. So hopefully a good balance there for everybody. So as actuaries, we often use our fancy data and modeling techniques and GLMs and all those kind of things to set base mortality tables. We're modeling experience. The CSI is busy trying to get experience. Individual companies look at their own experience, model that, and obviously also look at mortality improvements. Now in South Africa, there's not real evidence for that, but in other markets we deal in these mortality improvements that we also look at. And combining those two sort of assumptions typically then becomes your future mortality assumptions. Obviously we look at this as population and insured lives, but projecting forward those trends projecting forward those assumptions and trends is something that we tend to do, but we need to be very cautious when we do that because there's lots of things that can impact them. And in the recent past, there's a lot of more moving parts, it seems, that has really sort of highlighted the volatility of mortality and the susceptibility of mortality, particularly in South Africa, to large external events. I'm going to try not to say the T word today, but I'll try my best. You'll figure out what the T stands for later. So what lies beyond the data? Sort of agenda for the talk is really the demographic shifts that are occurring in those countries that I mentioned, including South Africa, the short-term shocks that could and have impacted mortality, sort of more medium-term changes, and then some of the insurance-specific impacts, the life insurance-specific impacts that we can see in mortality when we analyze it, and then more long-term unknowns, and there's some good and bad news on the long-term front as well. So that's kind of my rough agenda for the talk. Just going to quickly run through some demographic trends to show you lots of demographic things are moving and changing rather rapidly. This is the birth rate. Birth rates have been falling in all these countries that I sort of talked to, and South Africa in particular has recently seen, in the relatively recent past, seen a significant decline in birth rates, which means that patterns are going to change, our demographics are going to shift. We had population pyramids in another talk earlier, which showed sort of the South African population pyramid is becoming less of a pyramid over time, and that's something that we'll have to deal with. Other countries have lower than replacement ratio birth rates already, and basically that means that if their populations was to grow, immigration is going to start to play a larger role there, which is also a little bit of a hot topic as well. Aging population is also occurring, even in South Africa. We are actually aging. The median age in South Africa is currently 28.2. That means half the population in South Africa is under the age of 28 and half above, right? So that's what median is, right? Ages in other countries are far higher than this. So we have we're still relatively young, even though our population shape is changing, which really has a lot of implications for how we sell and how we work and how mortality will progress. I mean, I'm just looking at this room. This is a very young room for, if I presented those other venues in terms of actual conferences, the age profile looks very different in the room as well. Okay. And then life expectancy is increasing. You can see in all the countries, life expectancy has relatively consistently been increasing. South Africa has had a few, I wanted to say bumps in the road, but it's actually potholes, right? So sort of few potholes there. A fairly large one with HIV. That's actually quite a significant impact on mortality in South Africa over the early 2000s. And it's very good to see that that's sort of come back, and mortality has sort of recovered from that just in time for COVID. And then you obviously see the sort of impact in life expectancy for that period. Remember, this is period life expectancy, not cohort life expectancy. So it's just reflecting the mortality in that period, right? So that's sort of gives you some hint of the sort of trends that we're seeing. At a population level in South Africa, you can see, if you sort of draw a regression line there, you can see an improving mortality trend there, but it's very difficult to translate that into an insurance trend, if any. I don't think there's real evidence for that. Another shift in South Africa is sort of the economic shift that's sort of happening. This is a little bit dated, the sort of living standard measures, one being sort of lowest living standards and 10 or 11 being the highest living standards. The mix have been changing over the 2000s. A lot less people in the lowest living standards. So we are seeing a shift in wealth to some degree, or improvement in wealth and living standards for people, and that must also change the demographics of people that are going to be doing life insurance, and also the associated mortality for these people, in my mind. The data after 2015, I've looked a little bit. It's not really conclusive that the trends have continued after 2015, but at least we're seeing some significant trends there, and hopefully we can sort of, with the things Jeremy spoke about in the first presentation, there might be impotence to get the economy back on track and get the economy growing, on which might improve this picture further. This also means that the life insurance market will see a new set of customers coming in. We'll increasingly see new customers coming in from, and that must have an impact on the mortality experience there. I don't want to speak too much about Canada, but I think this is fairly interesting that I wanted to show you, is just the Canadian immigration impact in Canada, which is very interesting. The chart on the right represents the components of their demographic growth, or the change in population over time. You see the basic ones are the sort of blue, I don't know colors, sort of bluish one, and the yellowish one. One is births, and one is deaths. So just births and deaths really sort of almost cancel out, so their population is pretty stable. Then you have, at the top, you have net NPR. It's net non-permanent immigration. So it's people that are there temporarily, and you can see they had a lot of immigration after COVID on the non-permanent, and they're trying to cut that down now. The trends in politics has changed around immigration. You can see they've cut down on that a lot. But then the interesting one is the permanent immigration, if you will. People are moving there to become residents, and that is a significant number. And without that number, their population would be flat or shrinking. So they are really starting to become dependent on immigration. And you can see with those demographic trends I showed you earlier, that's just going to set to continue. What are the implications on mortality? I'm curious to see whether population mortality improvement in Canada will change because of this influx of people coming from different backgrounds. I think there might be something there, but also it's affecting the life insurance industry in terms of people wanting to customize products for these immigrants, used to different distribution methods, different ways of buying life insurance from where they're from, and the market is becoming significant enough that insurers are trying to think about how they can customize the offerings there. I think there might be some lessons for South Africa. We also potentially have a fairly large immigrant population, and how do we address that, and how that might impact our mortality and so on would also be interesting. I'm going to try to keep this to one slide, but I do think we need to talk about pandemics, and the potential future impact is still there. I think we've seen 3 major pandemics in just over 100 years. I think the way we need to think about pandemics, if there's one lesson as a life insurance industry we need to take, is that the incidence might be a little bit higher than we think, because we've had 3 major ones in that year. People tend to not count HIV, but it is actually quite an important pandemic that we've had. It's not as quick as the others, but it did have a significant impact on our mortality. And there's a question about increasing incidence. There are a lot of factors that are considered to contribute to pandemic incidents that are increasing. Things like, obviously, global travel, the the amount of places, there's papers that study the amount of places where food, animals, and humans interact, like the food markets, those kind of things where zoonotic events are more likely. Those are increasing. There's more of those sort of places around the world. And there's more places where labs are studying these things, so the potential for lab accidents also probably increasing, all else being equal. So there's significant uncertainty around that. I'm also a little bit concerned that, the way we look at our capital is perhaps not really, the shock is not really high enough. I don't think it really covers the COVID pandemic, for example, and therefore, we might be, for that one shock, have a little bit of issue there, because I believe the COVID deaths in the insurance industry was potentially higher than the shocks that we saw. So now a little bit more forward-looking, we've starting to see the U.S. administration, I'm not saying the T word, the U.S. administration has cut the U.S. aid funding significantly or completely, really resulting in a significant problem in the lower middle income countries around the world. This is a paper that was published that sort of estimated, firstly, the benefit of U.S. aid over the years. They estimated 91 million deaths saved in the period 2001 to 2021. And then they say, what if the resultant funding costs reduction is potentially going to lead to significant excess deaths in the next, up to 2030, in the next 5 years, of 14 million in those low middle income countries. So really the benefits being unwound of this amazing sort of thing that really helped with HIV, TB, malaria, tropical diseases, and so on and so on. So significant help. And I don't believe it was that much of their budget actually in the end that really helped those. So this is a concern for lower middle income countries, including South Africa. In South Africa, the big one is PEPFAR. I forgot the abbreviations. President's, a plan for addressing HIV/AIDS around the world and supporting HIV/AIDS. The paper on the right really estimates the amount of deaths that have been that might result in various scenarios. Without replacing this PEPFAR program and what it does in South Africa, they estimate between 50 to 60,000 excess deaths in 65 excess deaths in South Africa in the next 3 years or so. So that's quite a significant number and concerning for us in terms of mortality in South Africa. So the programs also helped with in terms of they were focused a lot on women and children as well, sort of preventing mother-to-child transmission and those kind of things, which is obviously absolutely important. They were also efficiently supporting they were managing a lot of the logistics of the organizational things to make sure these things get done. So it's not just the drugs. The problem is some of those infrastructures have now been lost. Those logistic sort of operation type things have been lost, and that's a problem. Even if the funding gets replaced, there's some damage done to the distribution of these things. Another more sort of medium-term thing is there are things that change over time that really affect mortality a little bit slower than pandemics and people pulling funding for HIV/AIDS. There's been various things that are changing over the time in the past, and we need to consider what things might happen in the future. This is an example from Canada. What you see on the right is mortality improvement. So the vertical axis is mortality improvement for males and females. But we've smoothed it and broken it down by cause. And, we fitted a model to the day to kind of smooth out and try to extract the impact of various causes on mortality improvement there. So you can see pre-2010, you have the most significant contribution to mortality improvements is the green one, which is heart cardiovascular type conditions. So that has continually been contributing to an improvement in mortality there. You'll see blue in terms of cancer as well there, also contributing a steady sort of steady contribution to mortality improvement over time. It's been pretty stable even after 2010. contribution has been there pretty stably. But in 2010 to 2015, we saw a significant slowdown in the cardiovascular mortality improvements in Canada, but this repeats in UK, it repeats in US, it repeats around the world in terms of there's a fundamental shift in terms of cardiovascular disease sort of mortality slowing down. And that sort of that's a trend and shift. So if you were assuming 2% for your mortality assumptions and it suddenly changes to, over a period of 5 years, to 1.5%, that can be significant if you're pricing significant mortality things there. The other thing that's interesting here is this, because this is Canada, you see this is North America basically, it's based in North America, you can see other causes worsening now. It's actually a negative now in population mortality terms in Canada. This is mainly part of the US drug crisis spilling over into Canada, or that's at least how the Canadians see it. The Americans see it differently. The administration sees it differently. There's also significant increase in suicide-related deaths, mental health-related deaths in Canada. That's also contributing to that other cause. So that's there. So the point is, you cannot always extrapolate these trends. You need a lot of consideration there. One of the interesting ones that I haven't really seen, which is in the sort of similar category, but it's almost a little bit more obvious, is smoking cessation. That's been happening, I think, at least from the 80s or before. Smoking levels have been reducing, right? Now, if you're looking at population mortality is impacted by smoking cessation, and that's a trend that has been included in our population mortality improvements. But you can only quit smoking once, is what I'm saying. You cannot project that forward necessarily, right? So you need to, when you're thinking about your mortality trends over time, you need to realize that some of that benefits are not going to happen again. And because smoking cessation is also slowing down, either it goes to zero, hopefully, or it slows down at a very low level. Either way, that benefit is not going to realize again. And particularly if you're using trends assumptions in smoker-differentiated rates, your underlying mortality rates anyway already include a differentiating for smoker status. So projecting population mortality trends on your smoker-differentiated rates is a little bit risky. Well, it is kind of wrong in a way. And then the new trend there, which I don't have a chart on, but you can see in Canada at least, 6.5% of the 15 to 19 age group are vaping daily at the moment in the Canadian population. I don't know what the South African stats would be, but that's a new risk which we don't know. Hopefully it's better than smoking. I don't know. I don't have the stats to hand, but it could also not be, and it could have all sorts of other things that we don't know yet in terms of long-term use. So that's sort of the smoking thing I just wanted to highlight. In South Africa, another medium-term trend that's on the positive side is I'm not going to pronounce it, lenacapavir. That's my interpretation of how to pronounce that. And this has now just been approved in South Africa. I think South Africa is the third country in the world to approve this for use. SAHPRA has approved this for use in South Africa. We've got money to get it, and the rollout is expected in 2026. This is a new form of drug which you take twice yearly, injectable, and it's kind of like a pre-exposure prophylaxis, so it helps you not get HIV in the first place, which is amazing if they can target this to high-risk groups and people that are likely that have high risk of getting infected. I think we can make a big dent in our HIV infections in South Africa. So that's a positive one to look out for and keep an eye on. I wanted to get a little bit closer to insurance underwriting because I think to insurance, and we'll focus first on insurance underwriting, is really there's the world of insurance is not a steady state. Things are changing rapidly in the insurance space. We have lots of focus on digitization, trying to accelerate sales, making sure that underwriting is kept to the minimum, trying to use predictive models to target underwriting in the places where it's needed, or reduce underwriting in the places where it's not needed. Those kind of things have been happening, and those kind of things are going to impact on our mortality trends in the life insurance space. Changing your underwriting, changing or relaxing your underwriting conditions, even with models and things like that, there is still small numbers of small changes in your mortality rate that we see. We see this in markets in the UK where in a reverse case, actually, they have become more strict in some areas in terms of mortality underwriting, and we can see the mortality improvements by underwriting here changing there in the UK, which is very interesting. So you can actually see these effects. This makes it very difficult, though, when you want to predict forward, right? Because you now have 10 years of mortality data. Some of it is ultimate, some of it is select. You've seen the last 5 years, a new underwriting change has changed your select rates. What do you do with the ultimate rates? Right? Is that underwriting change going to be permanent? That introduces a level of uncertainty that is quite difficult to deal with, actually. The same applies to distribution in the UK as well. They have we have the best data in the UK on distribution, but changing distribution channels as well as networks inside a distribution channel has impacts on the mortality experience, and we need to allow for this when looking at mortality trends in the UK and mortality assumptions in the UK, and the same problem exists there because you have insurance companies putting attention on distribution channels or networks that are problematic, and that has an impact on them either stopping to sell that insurance company's product or having better practices in terms of the distribution, resulting in a change in mortality experience for those products. How do you predict it forward, and how do you consider all these moving parts? So here modeling helps a bit, but it cannot extrapolate to the future as easily because of all the things I mentioned. One of the long-term unknowns that I wanted to address is, and this is a sort of relatively big unknown for me, is we have all these medical improvements which I'll get to, which we expect over the long term to have an impact, but this is a source of sort of negative medical improvements in a way. The NIH, National Institutes of Health, the National Institute of Health in the US, their funding has been cut a lot. I can't remember if it's completely or just a lot, but basically, Cutler then in a letter to JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, he said, 99% of all approved drugs in that period were based on research initially funded by the NIH. So the approved drugs in the US, a lot of them come from NIH funding or have origins in NIH funding. He also says reduced funding is estimated to result in reduced, he quoted a bunch of studies, so I'm just sort of summarizing his letter, but he quoted a bunch of studies saying reduced funding means less patents, so less new things being invented, and then new therapies contributes to improved life expectancy. So what I read in terms of what he's saying is, if we have this pipeline that starts with NIH that results in drugs 10, 15, I don't know how many years later, if that pipeline is now disrupted, we might see a change in our life expectancy down the track as less of these drugs get impacted. Now, it's clearly impossible to actually estimate this in any reasonable way, but and obviously some of that will be replaced by private or other things, but there are areas of concern. We saw the stable cancer improvement trend in the Canadian data. How is that going to be impacted by less cancer research? Because a lot of the cancer research in the US starts with the NIH. Yeah, and the obvious one for South Africa is the HIV vaccine research in South Africa was canned, basically. Some of it was canned based on the NIH funding being pulled. Measles is another one. It's really, the heading should really be misinformation and disinformation and its impact on mortality. I think we're starting to see people sort of not taking vaccines in larger and larger amounts in the US. This is the current sort of levels of measles cases in the US. You can see it has a log scale. Just be aware of the chart on the right has a log scale. So it starts at 100,000 in the early 1900s and then drops down significantly. Early 2000s was cases in the hundreds, maybe 100, 200, 300, that sort of level. And now, this year, we're sitting at 1,500 cases in October. It's already sort of higher than any of the years in the 2000s, pretty much, and the year's not complete. Now, there's only been 3 days, so yeah, we don't have to get completely alarmed at this point, but it's rather odd to have a disease that's quite preventable and people not taking the vaccines that stop this disease. So this indication of trust and misinformation and trust in the health system is really a problem that might grow for us in various other places as well. Okay. Some of the good news, somebody already spoke about it, so I'm not going to cover this in a great amount of detail. Obesity drugs, new ones like Ozempic, similar drugs like that, has very positive experience and is very promising in terms of mortality impact. It reduces your cardiovascular outcomes, has resultant improvements in mortality, many health benefits. Some of the downsides we need to keep in mind is cost. Costs are high on these things. People can't tolerate these drugs. There's a reduced enjoyment of fun things, if you will, and their side effects, right? After 3 years, only 1 in 12 people remain on therapy, which is the thing that we need to keep an eye on. I'm assuming they're going to be able to improve that number, work out these side effects, work out these kinks, but it's probably a little bit more medium term than a short term thing at the moment. There's lots of other medical research going on. I don't know all the details of this. Rapamycin is a drug that really attacks the mTOR or tries to stop an aging gene from actually activating. Organ-specific aging is another area of study where people are discovering like different organs have different age profiles and that might contribute to your system. There's a biological age and mental health correlation that people are starting to see, so they're trying to pull in mental health into this aging studies and more things like the Alzheimer's drugs that there's recent trials of Roche phase 3 for a new treatment for Alzheimer's, which are also going on. There's many more of these medical things down the track, so yeah, I think there are some positive long-term things that are coming. So I just took you on a quick ramble around the sort of things that could impact mortality. I don't have answers for it. I think for me, the sort of navigating this uncertainty is really having an eye on the data, even though you need to take into account that the data might not be a precursor to, or might not be relevant to the future as much, because you need to allow for all these sort of systemic impacts from the outside, but data will tell you what has happened in the past. How's cardiovascular looked at? What was the impact of COVID? What is the impact of HIV? How do I look at that, and how can I use that experience to look forward and decide how those kind of things might impact the future? Medical research, keeping an eye on that, and people and judgment and expertise in the medical field, expertise in the actuarial field, talking to people because people bring the insights. The data tells you what happened. The people bring the insights and the thinking forward. So that's it from me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Louis, for that discussion. I think we've got time for about 1 or 2 questions, so if you'll step to the aisle, just lift up. I see one hand there. If you just here to the middle, and then you can ask your question.
Morning, Louis. Thanks. Excellent, as always. A related 2-partish question. You, I think, alluded to some skepticism around the extent of mortality improvements, especially in the insured world. What is your take on the couple of insurers I've seen toying with using mortality improvements in their risk product pricing and reserving? And then maybe a lot of the concerns around mortality resonates with me. Maybe I'm a conservative actuary. But there are people with very speculative, crazy ideas saying, listen, we're going to reach longevity escape velocity in the next couple of decades. Should insurers or reinsurers be worried about those very wealthy, very large annuitants getting hold of these treatments and actually living, for many decades more than we currently expect? Thank you.
Yeah. In South Africa, I have the problem with insured mortality improvements is our data is not really good. We can't see it. I haven't been able to see it. So I think the moving parts are socioeconomic rating, which has resulted in us not having a standard base. The problem, some of those socioeconomic rating factors have not been adjusted appropriately over time, so you get drift in those classes, and that might impact your mortality a lot. and the quality of the data that we see, for example, at the CSI is not great, right? So there's a lot of systemic effects there, and grouping together data on insured population is difficult because company A has switched systems, company B has done that, and the underwriting practices have changed. That's a difficulty that I have seen. I've looked at Canadian insurer data where you can actually model mortality improvements inside the insured pool, and you can look at mortality improvements by sum assured band effectively, and you can see different levels of sum assured band resulting in different mortality improvements. Do I expect something similar in South Africa? Possibly. Do you want to price on that guesswork effectively? I don't know. Unless you have the data, you know, that's quite difficult. Your second question was really around, I forgot now. Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's something, I think it's a difficult one to do when, I haven't done as much longevity work, but I know people are doing scenarios, right? So the thing people are doing is scenarios around looking at what happens if cancer is cured in this way or this, you know, those kind of scenarios is what I see as relatively simple ways of taking some of that sort of positive shocks effectively for annuitants and saying, you know, what happens if this or that or the other is done. And then a lot of people are talking about hedging as well, sort of saying, well, you know, to the degree that you have offsets between life insurance and annuity portfolios, you could use that. I think it's the age profile is a problem though in most markets as well though, with that argument. It does possibly help with pandemics though, because you have, it's kind of, if it shocks the whole curve, you have a sort of a bit of a relief, because it's, you know, you could think about that. You know, that's my take on that.
Thank you so much, Louis, and thank you so much for that question. We don't have time for any more questions, but you are welcome to just come up to Louis and ask him anything you want. Don't forget, you can also find the speaker profiles, papers, and presentation summaries on the app. And also don't forget to engage on the social wall. We are now heading to the refreshment break, brought to you by IACA Consulting Actuaries. Don't forget, it's also time to go watch those two chess players fight it out for the 2025 chess champion in the Inside Chess Tournament. 10,000 for the winner, 5,000 for the runner-up, and then the corporate team trophy for overall team performance and pure bragging rights. In the spirit of foresight and social impact, Inside is also matching the winner's prize with 10,000 Rand donation to Moves for Life. Then if you've purchased tickets for tonight's Centre Court Cocktail Convention social function, please go pick it up at registration. And also, if you're no longer attending and you want to donate your ticket, please also pop by registration for that. Please also check the app for some time changes to the program, and enjoy your refreshment break.